Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It is 7:06 as we fly through this Wednesday morning in your nation's capital, getting you prepped for your day. Coming up at 8:05, Peter Schweitzer, you're going to want to be a part of this conversation. He's got a new book called Blood Money. It's all about communist China and how they've utilized their money here in the United States and the Americans who've gotten rich from them. And then at 8:35, Tom Bevan, Real Clear Politics, will give us his political analysis of last night's primary in Michigan and the way forward for Nikki Haley and for Undecided in Michigan, who really had a strong showing. Good for Undecided. You know, they've been out there for a while, and they're really doing their best. It's Larry O'Connor alongside Julie Gunlock.
Good morning.
Good morning, Julie. We continue to take this tour of the Republican primary process for the nominee for U.S. Senate. There's a lot of Republicans vying for the opportunity to unseat Tim Kaine as the junior senator of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And our latest go-around on that journey is Eddie Garcia, a 22-year Army veteran who served 3 times in Iraq and 3 times in Afghanistan, 6 combat deployments. Eddie Garcia, first of all, thank you for that, and thank you for your service, and thank you for continuing to be a man in the arena by throwing your hat in the ring here for the Senate.
Well, good morning, Larry. I appreciate it, and thank you guys for having me on.
I have to start with your service here. I think it's critically important to who you are and what you're trying to accomplish here, because I got to tell you, there's so many candidates for either Senate or for Virginia 7, Virginia 10 in Northern Virginia who are military veterans. It's like there's clearly something going on here with our military and with our national security under Joe Biden and under Tim Kaine that makes veterans step up and say, oh, no, I didn't fight for this kind of result. So to talk to me about your campaign here and your agenda shot through that prism. Why is it so important for you as a veteran?
Well, I can tell you, Larry, I'm the son of a ranch hand from low-income background, originally from South Texas. I served for 22 years. I joined the Army when I was 17. I retired after 5 years of congressional affairs in uniform. And to come back 22 years later and to see working people across Virginia struggling further behind today than when I left 2 decades ago in the most prosperous nation in the world, something's got to be wrong. And I think that as somebody who's deployed a lot and seen a lot of other countries torn apart internally, the same signs are here in America. We need a government, and we need people that want to represent us in government that come from us, not at us, and that want to work on behalf of all Americans, not just the Washington crowd, not just the political elite and the consultants and the fundraisers and all those that are connected. We have a large and larger growing population across Virginia of working people that are finding it harder to pay the bills, harder to make rent, and harder to find good schools to send their kids. These are real problems that are going to affect the generations to come. And I think veterans have seen this type of scenario play out all across the world. And sadly, it's starting to happen right here in America. And we're stepping up and we're doing something about it and trying to be involved.
Mr. Garcia, what is your opinion of the recruitment and retention problems we have in the military? You did 22 years. You've been deployed all over the world. Certainly what we saw in Afghanistan is just tragic. And some of the leadership of the military is questionable at this point. But how would you fix that or approach that issue? Because that is something I think that is really frightening in terms of our readiness and our ability to respond to some of the things that are going on across the world.
Well, I think there's 3 problems that have led to this. One of them, if you go back to the Obama years, Obama moved his recruiters away from the Southeast, where most of the recruits were coming in because he wanted a more diverse force, and he moved recruiters into the Northwest, where it's harder to find people that want to serve just over the past 20 years. That was, I think, the beginning part of the DEI program that we know now. The current problem is that we do have, a woke, politicized military led by Secretary Austin, who is a Raytheon lobbyist who's used his position in the service to get a cushy job on K Street, and then now has come back in as the Secretary of Defense. And is putting politics over the national security. I think we see that by just his lack of availability when he was going through his health problems, and the DOD leadership who are kind of asleep at the wheel. Thirdly, people that are in on the retention side don't want to stay in because of this. But then we also have a problem with veterans. I mean, our veteran homelessness number spiked 7% last year. We have more veterans that are suffering through mental trauma and mental illness after 2 decades of unwinnable wars from Washington's perspective. And nobody really wants to be a part of that. And so if we don't have people who have served continue to serve in a more public capacity in Congress or in the Senate, we're going to see the continued degradation of our national security. We can't. If we can't fight our own wars, we can't have our own nation. If we can't control our borders, we can't have our own nation. There are some things that government has to do. A strong, safe, and secure military is one of those things that we have to prioritize.
We're speaking with Eddie Garcia. He's running for the Republican nomination for Senate. His website, by the way, is Eddie Garcia VA, Eddie Garcia VA for Virginia.com. Listen, ultimately, you've got a lot of ideas, and I know that you've got, I've seen the issues on your website, and I know that you're ready to sort of pitch yourself to voters here about why you should be the choice. But I think ultimately, this election here is going to be about why Tim Kaine is the wrong choice, And I would love for you to take a moment here to show Republican voters in Virginia how you will make that case. What's wrong with Tim Kaine? Why shouldn't Tim Kaine get 6 more years?
Larry, it's a great question, because when I stand on stage next to Tim Kaine, conservatives, Republicans, independents, but even the Democrats, even this new crop of Democrats that are coming up in Virginia are going to be able to see that Tim Kaine represents the past and I represent the future. He caused a lot of problems that we see across the nation, across the Commonwealth of Virginia specifically, and I have solutions to solve them. He represents Virginia 1994. I represent Virginia 2024. I believe that we can do the simple things, that we can build a government that works for all Americans up and down the income scale, whether you're in the Valley, you're in the Southwest, South Side, Richmond, Nova, Hampton Roads, doesn't matter. We need somebody working for all Americans, not just the people who donate big money to campaigns. And that's a problem that sets me apart between Tim Kaine, but it also sets me apart to any other Republican opponents. I'm working a grassroots campaign from the bottom up. I'm like I said, I'm the son of a ranch hand. I've never had anything handed to me. I'm working really hard to see as many people across the Commonwealth as possible and provide solutions on how we build this better tomorrow in 2024 and grow the coalition that we're going to need of college kids, of veterans, of second generation, immigrant communities, young people who want to achieve the American dream. And we got a government right now that just doesn't work for them. It works for the people who have a lot. I'm working for working people.
I guarantee you, whoever the Republican nominee is, Mr. Garcia, they're going to be labeled as a Trump MAGA fascist, right? Who will get into the Senate and just do whatever Donald Trump orders him to do, because, well, that's all the Democrats have. How will you respond to that charge?
Well, they're going to have a tough argument on their hands, because I'm taking it to the Republican establishment as well. I believe we need a Republican Party that reflects the people that we want to vote for it. So if we want the farmers and the ranchers and construction workers to show up and vote for, we got to have a party that has a platform for them. If we want young people coming out of college to show up on Election Day and vote for us as a Republican, I've spent a lot of time in colleges for the past 2 or 3 months, and I'm going to continue to get them involved. If we want to be an open party, if we want to grow this party with different communities from different backgrounds and ethnicities, to include Hispanics, 11% of the population, we got to have a candidate that can go in there and reach them and authentically speak to their communities who live conservatively, who might not be voting Republican. And if we can make that argument, we're going to win it.
Well, it sure looks like President Trump will be that nominee. Do you think that he will be able to do that? His numbers certainly seem to be expanding, specifically with Latino voters that you just cited.
Absolutely, and that's the case, which is why he's going to need somebody here in Virginia to stand shoulder to shoulder with him as we make that argument, as we grow the coalition that we're going to need to win. I mean, sadly, the president hasn't won this state in his 2 previous runs. I believe with the right candidate next to him that's able to do all those things that I just said and rally these troops behind a conservative cause, I think it's up for grabs, and we can take it. We can send a shot across the bow to D.C. from Virginia that says a political outsider with a grassroots campaign and a bottoms-up message of working people, putting people first, has a message to win in 2024.
Eddie
the
Garcia.
Politics of the past is old and tired.
Eddie Garcia, EddieGarciaVA.com. By the way, I overlooked the fact here in your bio that you commanded paratroopers in the 82nd Airborne. So, I mean, you're jumping out of planes. That's nothing compared to running for office. So take it to Tim Kaine there, Eddie. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for your service.
Thanks for having me, Larry.
It's 7:16.
WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
Live.
From the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
O'Connor and Company is brought to you by Hadid Carpet Cleaning.
WMAL, making sense of world events. Because those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. Download the WMAL app to stream us for free.
You remember, well, you weren't there at the time, but in early 2017, I had 12 glorious weeks as the online editor for Weekly Standard. You know, that magazine that no longer exists.
Right.
But I will tell you, and obviously we parted ways after those 12 weeks because we had different visions, let's say, about the content of the website. And of course, Weekly Standard is gone, and I'm still standing. That said, there were some great writers over there.
Sure.
Say what you will, even if you disagree with their politics, they're good writers.
Yeah.
Mark Hemingway is
course.
just fantastic. Lee Smith, fantastic.
Yes.
Vic Mattis, great
Yes.
guy, great writer. Jonathan last guy, not so sure about. But that said, there's a gentleman who had worked at Weekly Standard, made his way up, and he ended up getting a job at the New York Times because, again, just a great journalist, great writer, good editor. And there was a time when the New York Times actually pretended like they wanted to have some other voices in the newsroom, right? Adam Rubinstein is his name, and he infamously
Did you remember? Did you work with him?
I did not work with Adam. I didn't. But he infamously was the person who was the editor and coordinated the op-ed by Tom Cotton that ended up basically blowing up the entire newsroom.
Right.
Wasn't his fault,
which is
by
now,
the way.
which has been proven true. Like,
Just 100%.
Yeah.
That
Because this had to do with Wuhan and with the origins
and
of the.
how dare they put Tom Cotton on our pages?
Racist.
That man is a fascist and he's a racist and he's Trump and he's this and he's that. So Adam Rubinstein is now, after maybe there was an NDA for a couple of years or he had to play out his contract, but he's just written an article in The Atlantic, naturally, explaining what happened at the New York Times. And there's one
when he first went there.
Right. When he first got there, he said, well, he tells the whole story, but this one little anecdote about his HR orientation day at the New York Times. Let me just read it for you real fast. On one of my first days at the New York Times, I went to an orientation with more than a dozen other new hires. We had to do an icebreaker. Pick a step. This is so Harvard MBA.
Completely.
And remember when they were melting down years ago and they had this whole thing where you passed the moose around the room and if you held onto the moose, you could speak. Otherwise,
dear God. No,
right?
I don't
It's just insane.
This is almost as bad as when staff meetings start with give us some good news and some challenging news.
Right.
And you're like, just can I get to the
So you pick a starburst out of a jar, and then you have to answer a question associated with the color of your starburst. My starburst was pink, I believe, so I had to answer the pink prompt, which had me respond with my favorite sandwich. Russ and Daughter's Super Heebster came to mind, but I figured mentioning a $19 sandwich wasn't a great way to win new friends.
I want that sandwich.
Yeah, but there's nothing more Atlantic New York Times than that sentence right there. Come on, come back to us, Adam.
Right.
That he said, so I blurted out the spicy chicken sandwich from Chick-fil-A. The HR representative leading the orientation chided me. We don't do that here. They hate gay people.
Oh, God.
People started snapping their fingers in acclamation.
At the HR, not at the spicy chicken sandwich, but at the HR.
Can you
person.
picture that room that, you know, if you snap your fingers if you agree with something that's been said.
Picture the room. First of all, most people have green hair, blue hair. Okay.
They're people who show up on the libs of TikTok news feed.
Yes.
People started snapping. I hadn't been thinking about the fact that Chick-fil-A was transgressive in liberal circles for its chairman's opposition to gay marriage. Not the politics, the chicken, I quickly said, but it was too late. And by the way, by sort of walking back the whole politics chicken, instead of looking around and saying, it's a sandwich.
Yeah, I know. He's immediately
basically,
like, I made a mistake.
Yeah, so he fed into it and sort of got everything what he deserved. All right, so then Nicole Hannah-Jones, New York Times editor in good standing, who literally has one article to her byline in the last decade and a half, I think.
She's a fraud.
She won the Pulitzer for the 1619
Which was filled with lies.
And so that's all she has to do. She
just sits there.
Oh, and she holds them ransom. She's like Joy Reid to MSNBC.
Yes,
they can
absolutely.
never get rid of her.
Right.
She commented on this on social media and said it never happened. Mm-hmm. Well, the Atlantic, first of all, John Levine, a buddy of ours over at the New York Post, he quoted and said, for what it's worth, Adam Rubenstein told me the chicken sandwich story back in 2019.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter to Hannah.
Because they both work in New York Times. Well, the Atlantic is very concerned that the Pulitzer Prize winning Nicole Hannah Jones would say that this is a lie.
Journalistic integrity, exactly.
Atlantic spokeswoman on the Chick-fil-A incident says that the details were confirmed by New York Times employees who had contemporaneous knowledge of the incident in question.
Yeah, well, Hannah, Nicole Hannah Jones, I'm trying to get her entire name, isn't known for historic accuracy. Yeah. So I'm not surprised. This goes fast and loose with historical details. Doesn't really care.
Imagine getting your job at the New York Times. You have to go through this HR thing.
I know.
They ask what your favorite sandwich is. You say Chick-fil-A, and you're immediately
seen as the right winger.
Because you like Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
Which, by the way,
but also imagine
majority of Americans like Chick-fil-A, which tells you the New York Times, they don't care about readers.
But imagine also like the transformation you personally have to go through that you mentioned this earlier, that your reaction was like, "Oh, shoot! I just like the sandwich. I don't like the politics."
Right, and
at that point, you immediately have to justify it,
and you've lost it.
And then you write an article, and you're talking about how you're justifying your love of a spicy chicken sandwich,
right?
But I don't like the politics, and just having to distance yourself, and also not examining that. I mean, I know that the whole article he's trying to say like that place was crazy,
right?
But
no, but he's the problem.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, and I mentioned this earlier in the show, that all the biggest money in the media is in the New York Times, and as we've learned from Don Lemon's exit contract, CNN, the networks. And so if you really want to cash out, you go get a job at the New York Times, and on day one in HR, you have a choice to make. When they start condemning you because you like Chick-fil-A, you can stand up and say, I don't need this in my life. No dollar is worth it. Or you say, oh, God, please forgive me and keep paying me.
And this is basically the career trajectory of David French, who has spent the last couple of years at the New York Times apologizing for his former conservative values.
And condemning all of us.
All
of his friends, yes. It's 7:25.
Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
7:37 on this very, very busy Wednesday morning in your nation's capital. We're analyzing yesterday's primary in Michigan. We're talking about what's going on in our community and in our country on a regular basis here through the perspective and prism that you appreciate. Making sense of the news and everything else going on in our culture and in our world. It's O'Connor and Company with Larry O'Connor and Julie Gunlock.
Good morning.
Good morning, Julie. I'm looking forward to our conversation at 8:05 with Peter Schweitzer, one of the smartest guys out there. His research team is phenomenal and fresh on the heels of a string of books exposing corruption in our politics. He's got a brand new one. It's called Blood Money. You'll want to hear that conversation. Then 8:35, we will speak with Tom Bevan of Real Clear Politics.
Great lineup today.
And with Tom Bevan, we're going to talk about this Republican primary yesterday. Let's pick up on that, though, real fast. Donald Trump just running away with it there, winning by, 60 points, it looks like, over Nikki Haley. Actually, the most devastating loss she's had in this entire run. This is the fourth major primary after the Iowa caucus, New Hampshire, South Carolina. It wasn't even close. Nikki Haley, of course.
I said earlier this week that no matter what happens in South Carolina, I would continue to run for president. I'm a woman of my word.
Now, she's, of course, said that the evening of the South Carolina primary. Yeah. I play it again today, mostly because I know it annoys you so much.
It does.
But it is interesting to hear the language that she uses there. See, here's the thing. Nikki Haley vows that she's going to continue running for president, not for the Republican nomination, but for president. And I really do think that what's at play here, the big decision that she is facing right now, that if she wants it, she could have that no labels nomination in a heartbeat.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of powerful big money people who are enticing her to do that.
And
because
there's a lot of never Trump money.
That's the money
Yep.
I'm talking
Yep.
about. And because the only reason to run, if you're Nikki Haley, that is, the only reason to run on a no labels is if you
to
want
hurt
to
Trump.
end
Yep.
Donald Trump
Yeah.
once and for all. And it might do it, actually. It might work. I've been trying to work the numbers here and run the numbers. Nikki Haley does draw a significant number of Republicans. Now, whether they will follow her to a no labels ticket just to hurt Trump, I don't know.
Right.
Because it will hand the presidency to Joe Biden. There's no doubt about it.
Right.
But if that's her intent, that's what she'll do.
Yeah, which I think, if she has any ambitions beyond this election year, it could hurt her. And it will also, I believe, hurt her with South Carolina voters if she wants to eventually run for Senate there. So I don't understand the calculation. I truly don't.
If the calculation is what's best for Nikki Haley, there's no understanding it.
Right.
If the calculation is what's worse for Donald Trump, then it all starts to make sense. We'll see. We'll see whether she's interested in being a president. If you've noticed, Donald Trump, during New Hampshire and going into South Carolina, he had some pretty harsh criticism of Ms. Haley, as you know, and he hasn't gone there. I don't know. He sort of ignores her now.
Well, that they announced that. They announced the Trump administration, or I'm sorry, the
Trump campaign
announced that they're going forward. They will ignore her.
Yeah.
So that's a campaign strategy that they've announced. But with Haley, you mentioned earlier, which I find so interesting, she never talks about Biden. She's only talking about Trump now, which I get it.
Or she'll lump
but
Trump with Biden when she talks about generational change.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Too old to hold the office. Yeah.
Well, that's the Republican side of the equation. We'll see what Nikki Haley decides to do. On the Democrat side of the equation, Joe Biden won, yes, with about 89% of the vote. No, actually less than that. I'm sorry. Joe Biden got 84% of the vote. 81%, excuse me. God, it's worse than I thought. 81% of the vote. Second place was 13.25% to uncommitted.
100,000 votes.
Yeah. CNN and Jake Tapper analyzed that on CNN.
About 20,000 people voted uncommitted. About 28,000 voted uncommitted in the Republican primary. And you keep going back every 4 years, and it's about 20,000 people in each party vote uncommitted. So I kind of look at that, and maybe you tell me what you think about this. I kind of look at that as the floor for the uncommitted movement this evening. 20,000 is that's
it's just trying so hard to rationalize this, right? And say, this happens all the time, isn't it? Well, it wasn't the floor, obviously. It ended up being 100,000. That was early in the evening when they had that, but we'll let them continue.
Kind of like what happens every election. They get 30, they get 40, they get 50,000. Well, now we're talking. That's a real protest.
Right. So if you look at roughly 20,000, and I think that's history says that's a fair number. One of the dynamics sometimes in those uncommitted votes is a certain candidate decides not to contest the state. Right. Back in 2008, the uncommitted vote was way higher because both Barack Obama and John Edwards didn't play in Michigan, and their voters voted uncommitted to sort of say, I want to go out and vote for my guy, but I can't vote for my guy. So it was much higher then. So the question this time, though, is there's nobody like that. There's not another Democratic candidate who said, I'm going to skip Michigan because Biden's strong there. So that, I think, is a true protest vote, as opposed to in years past where there were different reasons for it. Or it's, maybe let's not overstate that it's all about Israel-Gaza. Uncommitted is going to tell us people who had a chance to vote for an incumbent Democratic president or vote for his long shot challenger, and they chose to vote uncommitted. So it tells you, number one, they're unhappy.
It's still
which explains why we're saying,
It still amazes me that these people on television get paid so much money to give that kind of analysis.
I know. You're still angry about the $8 million a year.
Don Lemon?
Don Lemon.
Okay. You're right. I should let that go. All right, listen, Tom Bevan is going to join us at 8:35. Give us a little bit more detail here. But I think that this is a deep concern for Joe Biden.
Well,
100,000 people, Democrats voted no to Joe Biden in 2020.
As a protest.
Right. And in 2020, he won Michigan by 150,000 votes.
Well, Rashida Tlaib is having none of it.
Yeah. And one wonders if he's going to sell his soul and sell out Israel for the sake of Dearborn, Michigan.
We know.
Of course we know. His entire political career has not been notable in any way whatsoever with any kind of achievement other than to further advance his lamentable, corrupt political career. And if it means selling out Israel for the sake of Dearborn, Michigan votes,
no biggie.
Not even a question. It's 7:43. The Pope is sick. The Pope has been put into the hospital. He has the flu, and he's going to be okay.
Lord.
You're reporting on the Pope, you got to do it in Italian.
Oh, you do?
Yeah,
I didn't know.
even if your Pope is Spanish.
I don't think you do.
Argentinian.
I don't think you do.
No?
I think you can talk
You
just
like it in the
normal.
original Latin? You trad. They're going to send the FBI after you. Pope Francis has been suffering from the flu. He's been hospitalized. He's had issues with his lungs at various times for other reasons. 87 years old, and he's now in the hospital. And the Vatican says that, it's routine. He's got the flu. A lot of people are struggling with flu this year. It's been a nasty one, right? RSV. There have been deaths from the flu. Children, by the way, more children are dying from the flu, obviously, as they ever did from COVID.
That's right.
Should shut down the schools.
Don't give them any ideas.
They
Larry.
will, too. Yeah,
But
they
it
really
actually
will.
explains why, there's footage of the Pope being really weird about touching hands and
Yes.
makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, although he does come across kind of like a jerk when he does that.
I know.
He's the Pope all day long, but for other people, they have a very rare moment that they can meet the Pope.
course.
You've met a Pope. You met a good Pope.
I did.
The best Pope.
Pope John Paul.
John Paul the Great.
That's right.
You get to meet him
I did.
in your wedding dress.
I did.
You got blessed.
Blessing of the Brides.
I love that.
In Rome.
By the way, people are like, oh my gosh, the Pope has got the flu. He's in the hospital. He's like, people think that he's super old. He's 87.
Mm-hmm. Biden thinks he's young.
That's right, exactly. Do you think people think that this must be the oldest living Pope we've ever had, right?
It's not.
Nah, not even close, actually. Benedict technically was, but for the latter part of his years, he was the Pope Emeritus, so that
Yes.
doesn't count, really. He wasn't
He
an
had the
active Pope.
He had the grace to step down when he realized that he
Yes.
wasn't up to the job.
Oh, he had a lot of grace.
He did.
But then you go to Leo the 13th.
Oh, dear.
Leo's a great name for a Pope, isn't it?
Leo's a great name, period.
We had some really good Leos.
I think Leo was on our short list of names for boys.
93 years and 140 days. Then you got Gregory the 12th, 92 years old. Celestine
People
the
didn't
3rd,
live that long
91
back
years
then.
old. Well, the popes did. John the 22nd, 90 years old. You got to go.
No,
Francis.
seriously, back then, that was...
Oh, I know. That's a big deal.
That was rare.
Well, unless you go to the Old Testament times when they lived for
that's
800
true.
years. This isn't a Methuselah situation. But if Francis wants to be the oldest living pope, he's got 6 more years left. And I don't know if we can take it. It's 7:53.